Hey folks! There's a reason why today's episode started with this song. The song is called All That She Wants by the Swedish band Ace of Base. The song provided the initial spark for their worldwide fame and created the pop music as we know it for over the last 30 years. Why is that? You're about to find out. In the meantime, let's go further down the chronology of the world's pop hits. In the late 90s, the sweet-voiced boys from Orlando were releasing hit after hit. And NSYNC were right behind them. While these boy bands were competing to see who would sell more millions of records, 16-year-old Britney Spears popped up with her first single. The 2000s began. Every kid and teenager's bedroom is covered in Britney and Backstreet Boys posters, and there's probably no girl left on earth who never wore a Titanic t-shirt. And in the meantime, a slightly older audience is treated to John Bon Jovi releasing one of the biggest hits of his career. It's my life, it's now or never. In the late 2000s, Pink rebooted her career, which started to die down at this point. Meanwhile, Katy Peri was making a real splash. In the 2010s, a famous country pop singer, Taylor Swift, was shifting towards pop music as much as she could, thereby increasing her already multi-million audience. The second half of the 2010s sees the top of the charts occupied by Adele, The Weeknd, Ed Sheeran, Ariana Grande. What do these songs have in common other than the fact that they all topped the world charts? I'll tell you, they were written by the same person, except for All That She Wants. But without it, these songs probably wouldn't even exist. Today's long play episode is gonna be very exciting. Let's go. Our story begins in Stockholm, 1986, where 10 of the city's best DJs united to form a company called Swimix. For a long time, the company has been releasing compilations with remixes of world hits. They test the remixes on the public in their clubs, then play them in the studio and send records to the dance floors of Europe. It sounded something like this. Among the DJ crew there was a blonde-haired Doug Christovoli, or, as he was called by his colleagues for his love of pop music, Denniz PoP. He stood out because first of all he was a die-hard fan of his craft and computer games. Second of all, his approach was far more creative than his peers. And third of all, he wanted to write his own pop music. Moreover, not only did he want to write songs, he wanted to create his own song factory that would ship hits from Sweden to the other side of the ocean, not the other way around. And of course, everyone laughed at him. In 1990, Denniz began his first experiments with performers, and the first one was a dentist student from Nigeria who worked at the same club as Denniz. Denniz really liked his voice and offered to do the recording at Swimix Studios. This guy's name was Alban Uzomanwapa. Of course, the name was shortened, and since he was a dentist, they added the doctor part to it. That's how they came up with Dr. Alban.
Yo, my name is Dr. Alban.
The first song was called Hello Africa, a kind of homage from an African immigrant in Europe to his homeland.
Hello Africa, tell me how you doing.
Swimix colleagues considered everything Denniz and Alban did to be pop crap, and because of that, the song had to be released via competitor's label. The track instantly became a hit not only in Sweden but also in Europe. And of course, Denniz was asked to come back. As one colleague said after in an interview, "It all still seemed really lame to us, but we could use the money." Since then, Swimix has become a label as well, and 2 years later, Denniz produced Dr. Alban's album with this title hit.
It's my life.
But let's go back a little bit to the year 1991. Denniz is still experimenting with performers, and many of the songs are becoming quite popular, like for example the song Another Mother by singer Kale. This song was heard in a music store by the members of the then completely unknown band called Ace of Base, and it was exactly the sound they needed for their next song. On the cassette they sent to Denniz, there was a demo of the song called Mr. Ace. Leaving work one evening, Denniz picks up the cassette to listen to in the car on the way home. He didn't like what was on it whatsoever, but the cassette got stuck in the stereo system. The next morning, he picked up his co-worker. They drove around listening to the tape, had many laughs at how ridiculously it was recorded. But they couldn't turn the radio on, and the jammed cassette played on loop. Day after day on the way to work, they listened to the song. But after 2 weeks, Denniz just got bored with it and decided that this song needed some work. Well, we all know the result. If you listen to this demo, I think you'll hear right away that essentially every piece of the song was already written. There's just this strong feeling that everything is out of place and a bit overwhelming. And that's exactly what Denniz's immense talent was. Essentially, he was not a composer. The band had already written everything themselves, but he, like no one else, knew how to put things at their place, to make every beat, every note have its own purpose. And as a former club DJ, Denniz knew exactly what it took to keep the listener engaged. The single All That She Wants was released on the Danish label Mega Records and took over all of Europe. Riding the wave of success, the label asked Ace of Base to complete their debut album as quickly as possible, which they did on their own. In 1992, Denniz finally decided to leave Swimix. Realizing that it was Denniz who was holding the studio together, the studio manager sold it to the BMG label and opened a new studio with Denniz himself called CHEIRON. And that's where the fun part begins. CHEIRON was originally going to become a full-fledged label, but it was extremely difficult for a small company and very expensive. So they decided to focus on what they do best: writing and producing songs. By that time, Ace of Base's debut album had already made waves all over Europe, but no one in the US was willing to deal with it. At the time, all American radio stations were flooded with grunge, and of course, no one wanted light-hearted pop from Europe, until All That She Wants was heard by one of the most influential people in the American music industry. His name was Clive Davis. This is the man who introduced Whitney Houston, Bruce Springsteen, P. Diddy, and many others to the world. Clive was very impressed with the song and agreed to release Ace of Base's album in the US only with one condition. It had to have 2 more potential hits. First, he offered to make a cover of the song Don't Turn Around. And the second song he suggested to include was called The Sign, which the band was preparing for their next album. Clive decided to entrust the production of the song to Denniz, hoping that he would create the same magic as he did with All That She Wants. And it was a great idea. The US single All That She Wants reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. And the follow-up, The Sign, stayed at number 1 for 6 weeks. After that, Ace of Base's debut album, re-released in the US, sold 23 million copies and entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the best-selling debut pop album in history. One of CHEIRON's failed endeavors as a label was the glam rock band It's Alive. Its lead singer, named Carl Martin Sandberg, came to Denniz's attention. He recognized his talent for writing tunes and recruited him to record E-Type's album. And then he hired him at CHEIRON Studios. Whereas Denniz essentially always worked on feel, Carl was a real musician, knew the theory, and they complemented each other very well. On one of the albums they did together, Denniz wrote, produced by Denniz PoP and Max Martin. "Who's Max Martin?" Carl asked him. "It's you," Denniz said. And since then, we've known this man as Max Martin. Remember at the beginning of the video when I went through the decades remembering some of the hits? So the writer or co-writer of all these songs was Max Martin himself. And to make things even more interesting from here now on, here are a few of his latest singles. Impressive, isn't it? But let's go back to 1994 now. Back to Stockholm, to CHEIRON Studios. By then, Denniz had assembled a team of 8 talented producers and composers in the studio, and its concept emphasized that songs should be the product of collaboration. One person wrote the verse, another wrote a chorus, third person wrote a bridge, and the fourth one wrote the intro. Denniz would put it all together, polish it up, the result would be a great song, and they could move on to the next one. It was like a hit factory. The team did all the work in Stockholm, but one day Max and Denniz flew out to Los Angeles to work on 3T's debut album. It was Michael Jackson's nephew's band, which, by the way, he produced himself.
And I couldn't live a day without you.
Most of you are unlikely to remember this band, but you probably know these people.
What is your name?
I'm AJ McLean.
AJ, and who are you?
Howie D. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. My name's Brian Littrell.
And over here?
I'm from Tampa, Florida, and I'm Nick Carter.
Okay, and who are you?
I'm Kevin Richardson. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky.
In 1992, a music-loving owner of a high-end airplane rental chain named Lou Pearlman decided to create his own version of the then popular boy band New Kids on the Block.
I guess it's a brand new day after all.
He was just renting them an airplane for the tour and really wondered where these lowlifes got so much money from. Then he delved a little deeper into the issue and found out that the band New Kids on the Block made almost $1 billion in 1990. And in 1991, they became the highest paid performers in the world, surpassing Madonna and Michael Jackson. The story of the Backstreet Boys and the story of Lou Pearlman himself, who spent the last days of his life in prison, is very interesting. So let us know in the comments if you want us to make a video about them someday. But right now, we're talking about other people. Lou put together a band. They performed at SeaWorld, as well as in some malls, recorded songs that he himself had composed, and signed their first contract with a Jive label. Everything seemed fine, but this promising project just didn't have any decent songs of its own. This very same Jive label employed Martin Dodd, a guy who used to work for Mega Records, which released All That She Wants. he learned that Denniz and Max were now in Los Angeles and immediately showed them a tape of the Backstreet Boys performing at SeaWorld. Denniz showed a demo of the song they had written with Max, and the band, led by Lou Pearlman, flew to Stockholm for their first recording session. This debut single by the Backstreet Boys was released in 1995 and, just like All That She Wants, became popular in Europe. And the debut album, released a year later, topped all European charts. But in the US, nobody cared about the Backstreet Boys. And despite the rather large European success, of course, the band's management expected more. But that required hit songs. And in 1997, again in Europe, the multi-platinum album Backstreet's Back with a title hit was released. Jive then released the best songs from the two albums as singles in the US. And then, a full-fledged US debut album was released. After that, everyone knew about CHEIRON Studio. Crowds of fans flocked to Stockholm, painting the walls, stalking the musicians. It became a kind of a pilgrimage site.
Wanna talk to all the fans? You hear that? That's the fans outside. We're outside in Stockholm, Sweden.
Around the same time, Denniz PoP were in Stockholm recording the band and sing. These guys, with young Justin Timberlake as the lead, were the main competitors of the Backstreet Boys. And who do you think created them? The same Lou Pearlman. In an interview he said, "Where there's Coke, there's Pepsi. Where there's McDonald's, there's Burger King. Where there's Backstreet Boys, there's going to be someone else. Someone's gonna have it. Why not us?" In the same 1997, Max Martin wrote a song for then popular girl band TLC, and they rejected it. It would also be rejected by the boy band Five, this song. At the time, 15-year-old Britney Spears was auditioning for the girl band of none other than Restless Lou Pearlman. But friends of her family made sure Jive signed her as a solo artist. Of course, Jive decided to involve CHEIRON in the recording of her debut album and wanted to introduce Britney to Denniz and Max. But Max went to the meeting with Britney alone. Denniz was diagnosed with cancer, which by that time was left untreated for a very long time. Britney traveled to Stockholm, and in May 1998, with a great team at CHEIRON Studios, they recorded 4 songs for her debut album. In Denniz's absence, Max Martin supervised the process.
Om vi ändrade på det och gjorde någonting som någon annan gör, så tror jag att då skulle de nog inte tycka det var så kul längre. Komma till oss.
Denniz PoP died in August of the same year. Unfortunately, although his achievements even then were impressive, he never saw the very peak of what he had created. Over the next 2 years, the CHEIRON Song Factory flooded the world with their hits. As once dreamed by Denniz PoP, who didn't know music theory and was laughed at by everyone, the world stars went to Stockholm to record hits. In a decade, CHEIRON had developed its own unique musical style. They could not be confused with anything else. And in the year 2000, Max Martin decided to close the studio at the height of its glory. As one of the studio's producers, Christian London, put it, when even our grandma started noticing, oh, CHEIRON does that, we realized that we had started copying ourselves. Max Martin is by far the most sought-after songwriter on earth. he wrote more than 240 songs, 23 of which reached #1 on the Billboard chart. Only Lennon and McCartney made more. The concept of the hit factory that Denniz PoP created is still alive today. And the world knows many songwriters who produce hits one after another. But we'll talk about them sometime later. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
It's called Mr. Ace. And that song turned out to be all that she wants after.